Really cold, uncomfortably, whereby it's actually hard to sleep.
Yeah, I thought I'd come over and see how you're doing. Christmas trees. It looks good, festive, welcoming.
Any trees on your side?
No, we don't think that far ahead. Didn't occur to us. No. It was a great uncle, Yorkshire Regiment, and he came out in the first couple of weeks of the war. Mostly his unit was sent to the Ypres area, the First Battle of Ypres, where he was on the line for 23 days. Then and was withdrawn. His unit was sent up to the other side of these woods and was here on the Christmas Truce according to the battalion records. It feels very surreal, and you're here to demonstrate that fraternisation. And it's not just a show. You know, you really get to know the people, thinking, how did we really do this? How did we get to the point where they were just the hated Hun or something?
Der Batzen war zu ein. Heidi, heido, heida. Heidi, heido, heida.
It is not only wear a costume. It is to have this a little bit of these feelings that the men had in this time. It's hard to explain.
Thing is that those boys that were living in a period where the future didn't look that bright for many of them. Went to school. It was quite hard to find a job. Those who did have a job worked in a factory from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening. Had a kind of feeling, okay, this is my life. It won't get better. Maybe I will find a girl, get married, have some children. That's it. And then they heard the story. There's some kind of a war going on in Belgium, wherever that is. But it sounds fun because it won't take that long. It'll be over by Christmas. That was the story they were told. You're allowed to wear a uniform. It's quite impressive. You're allowed to go to another country. Most of those young men didn't live their own village. And you were paid to be a soldier as well. And the salary as a soldier was more than just as a man working in a factory. The atmosphere of fighting for king and country was something really important. So you have many reasons, and yeah, for that reason, someone like Joe Strudwick said, "Okay, I'm going as well."
The time of this Christmas truce was near the beginning of the First World War. Enormous hatred had been unleashed upon the world. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died just thrown over the top of the trenches into the weapons of the enemy.
Vast effort and expenditure to gain tiny bits of ground. Strategic mud hills suddenly was worth throwing everything into. My great uncle was killed at Vinci. His unit report, about 83% casualty rate. First Battle of Ypres, 12,000 men went in, the brigade, 3,000 came out. Casualty figures which would be unacceptable at today's standards. Then it was just one of those things. People were more kind of expendable, I suppose.
These men from both sides had left their homes, their loved ones, the very stuff and meaning of life.
I mean, being in a trench is being in a ditch, 2 meters wide perhaps, 6 feet deep if you were lucky, up to your thighs, sometimes in the mud, with hardly any food. Really, man living like an animal.
And they wanted to be home. They wanted to regain whatever they could of what had been their lives.
So the idea that we'll be home at Christmas, everybody understood it was just a very big lie. And they were standing there in the middle of nowhere, having Christmas in the trenches, not with their family, but just having a job to kill somebody on the other side that they have no idea who they are dealing with. We have testimony of German soldiers putting candles all over their trenches. And then you have in several places like German soldiers started to sing Christmas songs.
Prost, Kameraden!
So I wanted to read the notes of a Belgian soldier who was during the Christmas Truce on the Ypres front. Now I'm going to tell you something you will think it's incredible, but I give you my word it's true. At dawn, the Germans displayed a placard over the trenches on which was written Merry Christmas. And then, leaving the trenches unarmed, they advanced towards us, singing and shouting. No one fired. We also left our trenches, and separated from each other only by the half-frozen Ypres, we exchanged presents, tobacco. They gave us cigars, and we threw them some chocolates. Unlikely indeed, but true. I saw it, but thought I was dreaming. Was it not splendid? Think you we were wrong? It is said we ought to have fired, but would it not been bastardly? And then, why kill one another on such a festival day?
Shared misery makes a connection. If people both are in the same trouble, you start to respect each other. Both of them were homesick, both of them were convinced they would be home at Christmas. They weren't. They had to wait in this muddy trench, and suddenly the Germans took the initiative to actually say like, hey guys, over there, let's have a truce. Let's stop this ludicrous lunacy and just have a little chat and enjoy our company, because we're not that bad as you think.
It was for the first time they had the idea that they were a really human being on the other side, because the propaganda told them that the man on the other side was an evil animal. You had to kill it. And then you had that confrontation of people singing Christmas songs on the other side. And then from that moment, people are deciding, all right, let's come together and have Christmas.
I've forgotten it's Christmas. Yeah. Just forgotten.
They're showing pictures to each other saying, hey, that's my wife, that's my son. They came to the conclusion that the man on the other side was also just a man doing the thing that he thought he had to do.
Yeah, roaring parties. Let's stop this now. Go and have a beer, and we'll sort it out. And suddenly, the world's a different place. And it's just talk. You get to know people. Hey, they're just like us. You got kids as well? I got kids. It's just down the human basic level, really.
Soon, they were talking to each other as best they could, speaking different languages, and they had left completely behind for a few moments the hatred and relentless brutality, the callousness and selfishness, people who were willing to throw human beings at one another in the cause of death. And they rejoiced.
To do this here in this place, this is something special.
This short period, it is a period of quite humanity in the middle of the war.
Some of them, even in the early phase of the war, were pretty alive to the fact that they didn't have much chance of coming out alive. And they didn't. But why could they be so quickly responsive to this opportunity to connect?
Fraternizations in the history of warfare, it was not that rare. Both armies, sometimes they had a ceasefire and it was officially declared, so they could recover their bodies or they could treat the wounded soldiers who were in no man's land. But the Christmas Truce was different because it came spontaneous and unofficial, and along the whole Western Front such things happened. It was a symbol during a horrifying history.
Phenomena. Despite even in the most dreadful of situations, you see that humanity gets the upper hand. It's really a message of hope. It's a proof that sometimes humanity can conquer the most evil of circumstances, and that's a significance that go far beyond the context of the First World War.
It was an opportunity to connect across enemy lines, and in those moments destroy, obliterate the alienation and the hatred and the separateness. They were able to do that because that's who they really were.
Whatever happens, how horrible it is, people will always be people. And one moment they realize that they're not better than the other ones. And if you realize that, then you can have a discussion and end conflicts. But if one thinks he's better or different than another one, then conflicts and things like war will continue.
Bad part of the sad part in the whole thing is that that one thing didn't help to stop the war. After all, maybe when it was huge over the whole front line that it would have changed, but it didn't. I was born here in this area, growing up in this area, where you have the daily confrontation with the result of war. And I think that's the main reason why we still talk about what happened here, because we're living here and you can just stand on the place where it all happened, and we see the result of everything that happened, those cemeteries.
One of the most moving places here is, of course, Tyneside Cemetery. It's the greatest Commonwealth war graves cemetery on the world, and it contains nearly 12,000 graves of soldiers who fall near this spot where the cemetery is. There are more than 35,000 names of missing soldiers who never found a grave. On the other hand, there are still a lot of soldiers who are now still in the soil here on the battlefields. You can feel how big this war was and which sacrifice this gave for the different nations. And another thing on Tyneside Cemetery is that all the graves are equal. So an officer or a soldier, they are buried next to each other without any difference because the one was an officer or the other was a soldier. And there are also 4 graves of German soldiers, and I think that's also very moving to see how also German soldiers are remembered on Tyneside Cemetery.
This is the real face of war if you just look to it. Day by day by day by day, people have been buried here.
We begin tonight with the military operation underway right now. Civilian targets have been struck as well. Officials there are warning of a humanitarian catastrophe tonight.
When you do look at this, what would any sort of victory look like in a war head-on?
And when you have images on news when they start a new war again, we have a kind of feeling, okay, we already know what the result will be. And that's my feeling about the whole thing. I think you never can win a war. You will lose anyhow, you will lose. And having that daily confrontation of loss makes it so important for us to bring this story in, more or less hoping that maybe things will change after a while.
If we were able to look around and see many people who were trafficked, brutalized for money, people who grow up in near starvation situations or in families taken over by drugs or alcohol or people arguing and fighting, dismissing one another. There's so much trash. And we think that if we can only persist and gain some kind of success, some notoriety, some recognition, some pleasure, some distraction, some satisfaction, that we're going to have it all. But it turns out that we dry up and we have nothing. When we lose contact with each other, everything starts to shrivel and die. What really matters in life is not just ourselves and our little protective package, but how we can help each other along. Something happens within us when we start to respond to each other. Who we are is who we are with each other.